Welcome to our training on treatment and service planning, including transition and discharge planning. This training involves watching the attached video. A copy of the PowerPoint slides is attached for your convenience. After watching this video, you are required to complete the attached quiz with a passing score of at least 70% in order to successfully complete this lesson. A service plan is a document that is developed in collaboration with the person served and others that the person wishes to be involved in the process. The service plan describes the person's plan for case management services and should include a plan for identifying when services will be completed. It is a required document in the person's clinical record, and it may be considered the contract for services between the provider and the person served. The plan should include the person's strengths, as these will be the tools that the person uses to resolve any areas of weakness or problems identified in the plan. The strengths should be identified by the person served with assistance from the case manager. The plan should also identify the problems that the person wishes to address using the services provided by case management. In response to the problem areas identified, the person should also identify goals. These goals should be the end point when we know that the problem has been sufficiently resolved. After identifying goals, the plan should also include objectives for each goal. These are the concrete, measurable steps that the person will take to move forward toward completion of the goal. And finally, the plan should include interventions, which are the actions that the case manager will take and the services to be provided to that person. The service plan is not something that the case manager completes independently of the person served. While the case manager may actually complete the document, the process of developing the document should be a collaborative effort involving the case manager, the person served, and anyone else that the person serves wants to be involved in the process. The plan should be written in the person's language so that it is understandable to the person served. We want to avoid any professional jargon in the plan. And finally, the plan should be person-centered. There is a separate training in this series that discusses strength-based assessment, including a discussion of strengths, needs, abilities, and preferences, what we refer to as the SNAP elements. The service plan should use the SNAP elements in developing the plan. And finally, the plan should be written using positive, outcome-oriented language. I don't like to read to you when doing these trainings, so please take a minute to review the items that should be included in a service plan. There is a principle in mental health documentation called the golden thread. The basic idea is that information from the assessment is used to complete the service plan, and the service plan is used in the completion of progress notes. Information should be consistent through all of these documents, so the service plan should logically follow from the assessment. As previously stated, one of the parts of the strength-based assessment is the description of strengths, needs, abilities, and preferences, and this assessment should also inform the service plan. Here we look at some examples of strengths of the person served that may be identified in completing a service plan. The key to identifying strengths is the belief that every individual has strengths, regardless of the level of impairment. The individuals that we serve have to be incredibly resilient to deal with all of the difficulties that their mental health or substance use concerns bring into their lives. Unfortunately, many of the individuals that we serve do not readily recognize the strengths that they have. And for many years, the mental health and substance use service systems focused on impairment and weaknesses rather than a focus on strengths. We need to be dedicated to recognizing strengths and to working with the persons that we serve to identify the strengths that they have. Whatever we call them, barriers to services, liabilities, or weaknesses, the effects of the mental health or substance use difficulties the person experiences create limitations for that individual. The overall goal of our services is to improve the areas in the person's life where they have limitations so that the person can enjoy a full and meaningful life in the community. It is not surprising that we are better at identifying limitations than we are strengths, given our system's historical focus on these limitations. Additionally, the people that we serve are also better at identifying their difficulties than they are their strengths. When identifying limitations, it is important to communicate to the person served that these are not permanent, and the work that we will be doing together is designed to improve these limitations. This slide presents all of the different domains in a person's life where they may experience limitations. These barriers will impede the person's movement toward recovery from their mental health or substance use problems. Please take a moment to review all of the domains that are listed here. In developing our service plans, we want to fully explore the limitations that the person experiences. This slide presents some of the questions that we may ask ourselves to make sure that we have explored all of the limitations that may be addressed on the service plan. Many case managers incorrectly believe that they have to have a goal for all areas of limitations that the person has identified in the assessment process. Actually, the critical question in identifying problem areas and goals for the services that we provide is to ask the person served what problem areas that they want to work on while they are receiving services. Remember, the service plan is the person's served document. It is not the case manager's document. The ultimate guideline for developing a goal is to identify what the end state of the domain that we're addressing looks like, so that the person can engage in a full and meaningful life in the community. Remember that the problems that we want to address are limitations for the person that prevent that person from living a full and meaningful life. In order to assure that the goals that are on the service plan belong to the person served, these goals should be expressed in the words of that person. The goals should be appropriate for the person's life circumstances, their age, their developmental period, and their culture. The goal needs to be achievable. I pitched baseball for over 20 years, and although I profoundly wished that I could pitch in the major leagues, this was probably not an achievable goal for me. I'm only 5 feet 9 inches tall, and I never threw the ball faster than 85 miles per hour. so pitching in the majors was not realistic. The goal also needs to be something that the case management services can help with. And finally, we should make sure that we identify the strengths that the person has that they can use to make progress on the goal that is identified. Each of us needs to develop our own style in assisting the person served in identifying goals. This slide presents some examples that we may use in that pursuit, but there is no magic question. Assisting the person served in identifying goals is an art, which we improve through practice. What we need to do is to commit ourselves that we do not resort to identifying the goals for that person. We want to develop a comfort with the person's struggle in identifying what he or she wants to work on. After we have identified the goals that we're going to include on the service plan, the next step is to develop objectives. If you remember the movie What About Bob, Richard Dreyfuss played a psychiatrist who had written a book called Baby Stepping. The idea here was to identify small steps that a person can take that move them in the direction of the end state that we have identified as the goal. A warning here. Way too often in identifying objectives, we resort to the use of professional language or jargon. Way too often, we resort to identifying the objectives for the person we are working with, rather than working with that person to think about what he or she needs to do to move toward the goal. Just as the person needs to identify the goal, they also need to identify the objectives. This slide lists the characteristics of good objectives. Please take a moment to read through these. All of these characteristics are wonderful, but this is not how the people that we serve think and talk. When the person served identifies an objective, it will be our job to use words in the writing of the objective that include these characteristics, and then explain what we actually write to the person served. This slide provides you with some example verbs for writing measurable objectives. Please take a minute to review these. This slide provides you with some examples of measurable objectives. Notice that they describe an action that the person is going to take. I would note that these examples do not use a time frame, so we would want to add that on the service plan. Take a moment to review these examples. The final step of the service planning process is to describe the interventions that will be used to assist the person served in meeting his or her goals. Interventions describe two things. First, they describe what services will be provided to that person. Second, they describe any concrete steps that the case manager will be taking to assist that person. This slide presents some examples of services that might be provided to the person served. Please take a moment to review these. Okay, so we finally have the service plan completed. Now we need to exercise the steps for finalizing the document for entry into the clinical record. First, the service plan is to be signed by the person served. If the person served is under the age of 18, the plan needs to be signed by the person's parent or guardian. Additionally, anyone else who participated in the development of the plan should sign the plan as well. Finally, the service plan is to be signed by the case management supervisor. Once the plan is signed, a copy of the plan should be offered to the person served. The timelines for the completion of the service plans and updates is discussed in a separate training in this series. Service plans should be reviewed and updated whenever there is a significant change in the condition of the person served, and minimally at least every 6 months. The plan review is a face-to-face meeting with the person served and anyone else that the person wishes to participate in the review. The plan review includes an update on the progress of the goals and objectives, any difficulties the person has had in completing goals or objectives, and then any changes or additions to the goals or objectives. A progress note should be completed for the service plan update meeting, which should include documentation of the continued need for case management services. The transition process occurs at various points in the service process. These times include referrals or transfers to other services, a change in the status of the person served, discharge, and any follow-up activities. For the transition process, the case manager should document in a progress note any activity that describes any transition for the person served. The case manager should be responsible for completing any referral or discharge documents and assisting the person served in completing any documents that the person needs to complete for the transition. The service plan should identify when the person served will be done with services. The planning for discharge should start at admission and continue through the development of the service plan and any updates to that plan. The plan should explicitly state what actions, behaviors, or benefits gained would be the criteria for completion of case management services. Additionally, the criteria for termination from service should also be explicitly explained to the person served. Finally, the discharge criteria should be individualized and developed by the person served, just like the treatment plan. That completes our presentation on the service planning process. You are required to complete the attached quiz with a passing score of at least 70% in order to complete this lesson. Thank you for your time and attention, and good luck with the quiz.